Hello, my name is Jeff Rolka. I want to thank you for checking out my video. This is Community Questions 13, one of my favorite segments that I do here on YouTube. This is where I open up questions on the old Community tab and you very generously share your thoughts, experiences, and questions with me. And then I do my best to answer them. And so I am not going to dilly-dally, I'm going to dive right in. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. I really appreciate it. If you haven't yet, I hope you'll do so now. There are lots of ways you can support my channel. Those you can find in the description underneath the index. One of the things that I do in this video is post a little index with time codes that you can click on so you can go directly to the question or the topic that you are interested in learning about, because I realize these videos can get a bit long-winded. So let's get started. Hey Jeff, I sang professionally for 2 years, and this year it will be 2 years that I didn't take vocal lessons. I do sing every day, but no matter how I breathe, my throat hurts. I can feel that it's very tight when I sing. What should I do? Evaluate your technique in the balance of airflow versus vocal fold engagement, particularly as it pertains to registration events. You haven't said that you're singing into the upper register of your voice. That is a bit of an assumption that I'm making on my part. But generally speaking, below the primo passaggio, so like below the area where we start to transition into our upper registers, you can get away with an awful lot and not really experience much fatigue or do anything that's going to result in your voice getting sore, unless you're really grinding on it, in which case then it could still get sore. But there's an imbalance that needs to be evaluated, and if you're not currently in lessons, then when you're working here on the channel, make sure that you are carefully evaluating the sounds of the vowels, particularly in the transitions, and listen carefully to the intonation. Those are really good clues that something's out of balance. So if E to A to ah, don't line up, in other words, the sound of your voice or the intonation becomes inconsistent as you transition amongst them, or just the general sound quality is different from vowel to vowel to vowel, something's out of whack, out of balance, and that needs to be evaluated, and that will, it may not entirely solve the issue, but it will certainly help. Hey Jeff, it's what it says. I have a lot of questions, but I'll choose one. Is it good to sing every day? Yes, within certain parameters. If you're using good technique, then I see no problems with it. If you're having difficulties or you're getting sore or things like that, then again, kind of referencing back to the first question, you need to evaluate your technique. I sing just about every day. Some days I can be more mucusy than others, but generally speaking, it's fine. Or is it better to let your instrument rest? Again, different individuals, different teachers will have different opinions on this, but basically, if you are using well-balanced, sustainable technique, singing every day should be fine. Sometimes I feel tired or a little pain. Thanks for your exercises. And the pain, Mary from Argentina, thank you, Mary from Argentina. The pain there is the issue. That is a good clue that something is out of balance. Now, some people, some styles want to use a belted phonation more frequently than other styles. Opinions on that practice aside, that is going to require more vocal rest than if you are doing voce piena in testa, or even going a little bit further and using a more overall cricothyroid dominant sound. That being said, that too can be taxing just because it tends to be a little bit more wearing on the voice due to the imbalance. The more that you phonate in a balanced capacity, the more sustainability you will have, the less rest you will require. That being said, if you're just tired, your body is tired, you had a hard workout, or you're just sleepy or something, that can make it so that you're not adequately engaged and quote-unquote supporting your voice, and that too can fatigue you. So you have to take a general kind of inventory of how you feel. And if you are feeling tired, then you will probably not have enough energy to adequately use your voice. Take a little bit of a rest. That's fine. We all need rest. Even though I can, from a technical standpoint, sing every day without any kind of deleterious effects to my voice, I don't. I take rest days too. And I think that that's important, not necessarily only for our voices, but also for our frames of mind and just living. I don't know. Hey Jeff, that's the third one. The fourth one's going to do it too. I'm taking a few virtual classes over the summer, and I have a piece that goes up to a G5. That's rather high for me, and I was wondering how to either get more air or open my throat enough to get up there comfortably. So this individual hasn't told me much more about themselves or their voices except for that. G5 is different for the different Fox. So a soprano vocalist having to sing G5 is either at or just above their secondo passaggio. That could basically mean nothing. It's just a little bit of additional engagement and making sure that they're allowing the voice to get more cricothyroid dominant. Mezzos, a little bit more than that. They're a major second, anywhere from a major second to a major third above their secondo passaggio, depending on their voices. Altos, perfect fourth now above the secondo passaggio, but more important for the alto still is that frequently, unfortunately, that range isn't always developed above the secondo passaggio, and so that could be even more challenging, and they may need to evaluate their technique at the secondo passaggio more carefully. For the tenor range vocalist, this is now well above the tertiary registration event, which happens around B flat 4, B4, right around there. This requires an awful lot of release and an awful lot of engagement in order for the vocal mechanism to have the ability to release and abduct adequately in that register. Baritones, same, but even more so. I like the lip trill for this. I particularly like the super lip trill. By pulling the cheeks apart, you're going to make it a lot more difficult for the lips to keep going. This will tell you quite quickly if you are using enough engagement and airflow. And if you're not going to have enough release for the vocal fold to change shape and accommodate that register of your voice. So I can't be more specific because I just don't know that much about your voice and what your practice is like. But in general, those are the things that I would work on. Hey Jeff, sometimes when I sing very high, I lose a little bit of control on my lower register. Does that mean I'm straining? P.S. I'm a mezzo. They go on. I have difficulty holding high notes. How do you do them? Wait a minute, that's another question, isn't it? Yeah, that's a different question. Sorry, rewind. Does it mean I'm straining? P.S. I'm a mezzo. Maybe, but maybe not. Oftentimes, if we are practicing and vocalizing and we are entirely focused on one area of our voices, then we can kind of lose a little bit of the ability to phonate adequately in the other registers. You'll see this very frequently happen. I see this very frequently happen in lessons when we have been working primarily on registration events. So I've got a tenor vocalist that I'm working with online or before the coronavirus in the studio or something like that. And we're just, like all lesson we're in this area working through this transition. And then all of a sudden they've got a piece that starts down here. Oops. That can be a little bit challenging when all you've been doing is balancing things out around the secondo passaggio. This is why I started doing this a couple of years ago. On a lot of the warm-ups now, you'll notice that at the end of the video, there's like a chill out section where I go through a few vowels or chordal exercise, and it's very much in the middle, like comfy middle or even mid to lower end of the FOC in question's range. This is to kind of round things off and tie the room together, you know, as the Big Lebowski might say. We want to make sure that we still retain the ability to phonate in those registers. And this is done because I don't necessarily know what you're going to turn around and start singing. And so I have to assume, or I feel that I ought to assume, that the range of the warm-up ought to cover a reasonable overall tessitura for most repertoire. So assuming that the tenor, just again throwing off the cuff here, the tenor has vocalized to a G4 or an A4, give or take, then I want to vocalize them down to here or even here. So we've got the better part of 2 octaves of range covered. Certainly there are repertoire that will exceed that, but there are always exceptions, and we can't account for every single exception. This is again why there's so many different warm-ups. So that is possibly what's happening, but again, without knowing more or more details or hearing you, it's really hard for me to say. I can't rule out that you're straining, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're straining. Lower voice registration functions, lower voice function, or the lack thereof does not necessarily mean that you are straining in the upper register, but it doesn't rule it out either. I have difficulty holding high notes. How do you do them while having your diaphragm support you singing? I don't know if my question makes sense. Certainly it makes sense. Absolutely. So the diaphragm is an involuntary muscle. In order to influence its behavior, we do all these external things. In questions from comments, I think it's either 5 or 6. I think it's 6, and it's coming out really soon. I redo my whole Apogeo breath management practice. And I would advise you to check that out when it comes out, or it might actually be out by the time this is out, so hopefully you will have seen it. But if not, I'll put a link up here so that you can check it out. The point is, holding long notes for a vocalist is different than most other instruments. Yes, on a woodwind instrument, you have to maintain the flow of air, otherwise the note would just fade away. For us, this comes in the form of, to me, feeling like we're working harder and harder with the engagement. So the longer I hold a note, regardless of where I am in my overall range, I feel like I'm working harder and harder and harder the longer it has to be sustained. If I don't do that, I will quickly encounter other issues, such as poor intonation or a change in the tone color or something to that effect. A loss of volume would be another thing that could occur. We have to continue to work and work and work. My dear friend and vocal coach for a long time, Megan Dibble, used to say we have to refresh the air column, refresh, refresh, refresh. And that was a way to help me think about continuing to put energy into my expansion and engagement. I've noticed when I wear an N95 mask snugly around my nose bridge, I feel as though something gets blocked off and I find it more difficult to speak, let alone sing in my chest voice over the day. I'll slowly lose the ability to resonate and access any of the lower register in my voice, so all I have left to speak with is a light head voice. Usually the effect clears by the next day, but sometimes can last a few days. Seems mucosal? Question. Has anyone else experienced this? Jeff, do you have any idea how this could occur? Ways to mitigate it. There's also been days pre-COVID that I've experienced this same phenomenon without a mask. Sometimes I just wake up and don't have access to the bottom third of my range. And that last bit makes me question whether the mask has much to do with it at all, or if the mask is just exacerbating some existing issue. It could be mucosal. In that regard, I'm wondering about like pressure on the sinuses and things like that. That could be aggravating something that's going on in there. But then when you say that you wake up with this and it happens to you, that sounds like it could be more of the after effects of an acid reflux kind of condition, or something else that's happening in there. And I think of acid reflux because of the way that you're talking about the loss of your voice. Acid reflux typically for the vocalist has the effect of irritating the vocal folds. This would be like a mild case. If you have a more severe case, then a lot of other worse things can occur too. But it tends to irritate the vocal folds. When the vocal folds get irritated, they will prevent vocal fold function. But the thing is that usually that limits you to your chest voice, the opposite way around. But I wonder about if you're trying to kind of be gentle or something like that, and you're ending up only using a little bit of the overall length of the vocal fold, and you're only adducting it quite lightly, and so you're getting this cricothyroid or head voice kind of phonation or speaking voice. Really, really hard to say. I know it's difficult nowadays to do this, but I would advise you to check in with an ENT or your GP if you need to go that route before seeing the ENT, and see if they can shed some light on this. You haven't said that you're clearing your throat frequently, nor that you have like a lot of nose drip or you're blowing your nose or anything like that. So that makes me question the mucosal thing. That being said, you would have more insight into that than I, because of course it's your body, and you would know if you are blowing your nose or you're really snotty that day or something to that effect. Maybe try and notice that next time this occurs. But I do hope it clears up, and I do hope that you can get some more information either through an ENT or through observations. Jeff, this one starts off with "Hey Jeff" too. Hey Jeff, I sometimes have trouble keeping my soft palate raised for proper resonance. Do you have any practices that might help? Is usually the one I reach for, just to generate awareness of the muscles that are controlling the soft palate. When you make that noise, you can feel the rear of the soft palate lifting and the musculature that's doing it. Pay attention to that, try and feel it, try and be aware of it, and then try and incorporate it into your practice. Another one that's a very favorite of mine is the NG noise. However, when you practice that, you have to go for the nasty, bright kind of sound there. If you allow your voice to be hollower, actually, as I do that now, I still feel quite a lot of lift there in the soft palate. But unless you are getting an abducted vocal fold through the zona de passaggio or over your secondo passaggio, I would advise you to keep it in the more brilliant forward position. It never hurts to experiment, but do so consciously. In other words, if you're doing hollow, make sure it's consistent. If you're doing bright and forward, keep it bright and forward. Do not, or I should say practice, so that it does not go from one to the other without your conscious input. In other words, if you start bright, but it goes hollow at a certain point in your exercise, practice so that you can be consistent. Hey, I am amateur and I am trying to get a better singing voice. I use your vocal warm-up and it is pretty good. Unfortunately, after a few minutes of singing, about 20 minutes, I got very tired. I started again after 1 month of vocal rest. Also, I can't go higher than G4 on my belting range. My top was B4, but it sounded awful. How can I expand my belting range? Any advice? So lots of stuff going on here. I do not advocate belting more than a major second over your secondo passaggio. Your comment hasn't given me any indication of where that might be. So I don't know if G4 is a major second or a major third or whatever above your secondo passaggio. Nor do I know that B4 is like how that relates to your secondo passaggio as well. That may be why you're getting so tired. And by tired, I'm kind of interpreting that as vocal strain, which I realize I could be wrong, but generally we take vocal rest when we have strain. And by what you've written here, I'm making that assumption, and I hope I'm on point here. Work on your registration event. That is how you will achieve greater overall range. You can then choose, once you've established that technique, how much voce piena in testa you wish to be, or if you wish to even take that further towards a more belted sound, or you want to go another direction, or do whatever you want. The point of vocal technique is to facilitate your artistry. Generally speaking, finding the balance in the voice is the most challenging. But it's from there that we can really effectively go in all the other directions, mostly because that middle ground, being the most balanced, is the most sustainable. And a little bit of a nudge in one direction or another gets the affectation, for example, of the belted voice, without inducing all of the strain in the untrained voice that one might normally experience before they've established really balanced phonation across the registration events. That would be my advice in terms of expanding, or utilizing, I should say, all of your overall range, and hopefully reducing your fatigue too. Hey Jeff, I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say you are my favorite vocal coach ever. I took your lessons for 2 years and now I am very proud of my voice now, and this is because of you. Thank you so much for that. Thank God I discovered your channel in the right time. I wish you all the best in your life. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It means a lot, and thank you. I'm glad that the channel has served you so well, and I hope that it will continue to do so. Hey Jeff, I've been working on my singing for a year now. I use your daily tenor singing exercises and also your video about pitch and tone. I can definitely hear the difference in my singing, but I'm still struggling to sing in tune. I know I have to be patient, so I will. I'll trust in you and your knowledge, so it'd be awesome if you could make a video about that. I think there are a few videos about intonation, but they generally fall into the category of ear training. So there is an ear training playlist. I'll try to remember to put a link to it here, but it's easy to find on the channel. Now granted, singing in tune is part vocal technique. It is also part concept of where those pitches are, and that is where ear training comes into play. So yes, the vocalizations are kind of ear training, but without syllables or a practice in developing relative pitch, we're not going to go as fast. If you work on solfege, it will go a lot faster, and your intonation, assuming that your technique is commensurate to it, will improve quite dramatically. Ear training, I'm going to have to silence that. Ear training is really, really important to us as vocalists. It's important for us musicians in general, but ear training for us is absolutely critical, and honestly, I should do more about that on the channel. Afternoon. Would you consider sharing your ideas on sostenuto? And do you find the idea of placement useful in your teaching? Pretty much everyone talks about singing in the mask or keeping it forward. But on the other hand, I've read biographies of singers who said they felt it anywhere from the roof of the mouth to the back or top of the head. Just wondering. As always, glad to have your view on things vocal. Fantastic. I love these questions. Fantastic question. I really want to acknowledge that. That is a really, really good question. I perceived two questions in here. One on sostenuto, which I am interpreting as legato and sustain in the singing voice, and the other one which is about placement. Regarding sostenuto and legato, that is what I would consider to be the neutral starting point for most phrases, and then from there we develop what breaks or rhythmical kind of intensifications that are required. The reason why I consider that to be so is because that is where we get the most balanced and ease of vocal function. So, for example, if you had a musical phrase that was ascending over the secondo passaggio, and you had a lot of, say, tenuto or even staccato pitches that you had to sing, it will be more effective to learn it in a legato phrase initially, and then put the breaks into the phrase as necessary while working to maintain that feeling of sustained engagement through the body. So while the phrase may be, and it's true, I'm pulsing a little bit to do the articulations, the way that I'm feeling my body is much more as if I'm really singing legato through that phrase. A consistency of engagement throughout the duration of it. And that's just with a vocalization. When we start putting consonants and words, in my opinion, it gets even more challenging, and that means that that feeling of sustained engagement and legato in the phrase is even more critical to proper phonation, to proper singing. The placement aspect of the question is extremely savvy and well observed. That some vocalists will tell you it has to be in the mask, and some others say it has to be, in the back. Keep it back, keep it back. Don't do this, don't do that. The short answer, and this could turn into a very, very long segment of its own, but the short answer to this is that, for better or for worse, those ideas on placement and what is generally voiced, feel it in the mask, feel it on the roof of the mouth, feel it in the back, were helpful for some vocalist at some time. And that vocalist in turn used it on their students, and so on and so on. And so these ways of talking about placement have been perpetuated over the course of time, such that they have sort of taken on the role of technique without actually telling us very much, and also not really addressing the issue in the vocalist who happens to be standing in front of you or is you yourself. So, case in point, if you have a vocalist who is, just to use the vernacular, swallowing all of their vowels, then you might say, like, feel it on the teeth, feel it in the hard palate, feel it in the mask, any of those directions to change the way that they are thinking about where their voice is located. Conversely, if you have a vocalist who's separating the vocal fold and everything is coming off very nasality, then for them you might say, put it in the back, keep it out of your mask, keep it out of your nose. The reality is that those discussions of placement are really changing how the vocalist is adducting or abducting their vocal folds and the kind of airflow that they're applying. That's really where the voice is emanating from, is at the vocal folds. And the surrounding soft tissues are amplifying it and resonating along with it, creating this non-linear occurrence, which gives us that really, really big, rich tone. So when you hear like a really, really rich toned vocalist, that is due to them having very, very good balance of airflow and vocal fold adduction, but also a lot of release of the soft tissue, such that it can resonate sympathetically with the vibrations that are being created. placement can be very helpful in avoiding all of this technical discussion. And so I think that that is why even I, though I try to avoid it, am guilty of this too in the context of lessons. But what I am not guilty of is using them as catch-alls or letting the vocalists with whom I'm working think of them as a catch-all. I try to avoid it anyways. The unfortunate thing too is that when it works, it often gets perpetuated because it worked. And I think people mostly want to help others, particularly when they're trying to get someone to help them sing and they want to enjoy their voices and they've had this experience and they enjoy their voice. Anyways, placement can be very helpful in shortcutting all of this technical language, which can be difficult in the context of a lesson when you're wanting to move quickly and you want to help a vocalist. But the long-term way of thinking about this is thinking about the vocal fold, how it is adducting, the balance of airflow, and if there's something that needs to change, thinking of it as being forward or back to kind of short-circuit that, to keep it simple, to think about it simply while you're in that practice, knowing what's really occurring. As I talk about it, I wonder if knowing is really that important except for the instructor. But then again, when these concepts get perpetuated without understanding the underpinnings of it, I think is where we get into trouble. That's where one vocalist tells another, you got to keep it, in the mask, keep it out of the back of the throat, when the vocalist in question doesn't need that advice or it's not working. Then understanding what's really at play, the adduction of the vocal fold and coordination of the airflow, that's where that understanding is helpful, because you can create or try a different exercise or have a discussion that could then maybe move the ball forward. I do hope that helps. More of a personal note, do you find songs to be better when they mean something to you when they are sung? To cope or to cry, to enjoy a feeling, etc. People talk about it being healing, and I kind of have to agree. Thoughts? A cool question. The professional in me says it shouldn't matter, and I'm reminded of a lesson that I had where the teacher was telling me that I can't ever know what's going on inside a performer's head, that they might be thinking about the sandwich that they want to have after the gig. And that's true. But that's not what your question was about. Your question was about my own personal experience. And I find that the more songs I sing, the more life I am blessed to live, the more I find something in almost everything. I find some little path inwards that I can reflect upon, that means something to me. Even that might mean to someone I know or someone I care about. But then again, there are songs that meant something to me a long time ago, and those tend to have some of the more powerful singing experiences. And truth be told, I don't just sing anything. I sing what I like to sing, and if I didn't care at all, then I guess I would just sing any old thing and it wouldn't make any difference. But I choose repertoire for myself, and as I reflect on it here, I can see sort of commonalities and threads that run through it. So yeah, I guess so. I want it to mean something to me, and that makes it a little bit more personal, I suppose. I was once told that intimacy, that personality that it touches in us when we're singing a song that means something, is that vulnerability is our mode of currency. That we have to approach the breakdown point where we can no longer sing, when we're verklempt and we're crying or upset, or we can't go on, or afraid that we're going to break down in tears or something to that effect. That we have to get as close to that as we can before backing away from it. And it's at that point that we are going to emote the most effectively. I don't know. Maybe. I know that being at that point feels pretty good, feels pretty exciting to me. And I imagine that that does get conveyed. So, yeah, I guess it does mean something. Hey, Jeff, how do you control your airflow and resonance when transitioning into registers? The question didn't specifically say upper register, though I am interpreting it in that regard. I don't really consciously control my airflow in that way at this particular time. If I'm getting into trouble in a phrase, I would consider that I need to engage more effectively in order to make a more effective transition. But in general, that kind of conscious control, I expect to be done in practice such that it is habit when I am performing. And that is what I would advise you to do. So generally speaking, as you ascend a phrase, you want your engagement, your subglottic air pressure to increase. And as you descend a phrase, it will decrease slightly, but generally speaking, we release too much too soon. So be very, very conscious of that. Do not disengage too much on the way down. I would in fact advise you to do exactly the opposite, which is to engage more as you descend from a high pitch. This will counterbalance the subconscious habit of disengaging and probably help your phonation quite a bit. If you've ever had those phrases where you kind of go too low and then come back up to the pitch, that's a good indicator that you're releasing too much and you need to sustain your engagement more effectively on the descending phrase. Hey Jeff, so when I do lip trills as a warm-up, I don't push air and I have good posture. It hurts my voice. It used to work miracles, but it doesn't work anymore. Why is this happening and how can I fix it? It's some kind of imbalance. Whenever you're getting that kind of vocal fatigue, there's an imbalance of some kind that's occurring. So it might be airflow. It is certainly related to vocal fold engagement or vocal cord tension, however you want to talk about that. One might also say how firmly you are adducting the vocal fold or closing the vocal fold. Any of those things can cause fatigue or a little bit of irritation to the vocal fold. It needs to be addressed. My advice to you is to stick to a comfortable middle range and assess it there, then move outwards from there. So establish good phonation, 5 vowels, lip trills, melismatic exercises, things like that. In the comfortable middle range of your voice. As that is established or reestablished, then move outwards from there. If this is only on the lip trill, then something's going on. Again, you're going to have to evaluate how the vocal fold is adducting or closing, to what degree, or if at all. Sometimes I hear people do the lip trill and there's a great abduction or separation in the vocal fold. That's actually going to, particularly if you're in a lower range, that can cause a lot of vocal fold tension. And that could fatigue you too. So have a listen, evaluate that, assess the adduction or lack thereof of the vocal fold, start in a comfortable mid-range, move outwards from there. What do you mean when you tell us to engage? Also, how long should one warm up their voice? Thanks. Engage is the word that I use instead of support, but I use it instead of subglottic air pressure too, because subglottic air pressure, quite frankly, is a mouthful, and it sounds kind of ridiculous to say when I'm just talking in this capacity. But when we talk about the air column in the singing voice, what we're really talking about is the pressurization of the air below the epiglottis, below the vocal folds. And it is that column of air and the range that you're singing in that determines how effectively you're going to phonate. So if you are using too much engagement, too much force, then you might get a very airy sound, or you could end up kind of shouting a little bit or something to that effect. Conversely, if there's not enough subglottic air pressure, then the vocal folds will tend to squeeze tighter to try to give you the pitch, and that can cause problems as well, generally thought of as straining or squeezing for the notes. I don't refer to it as airflow any longer because the flow of air, believe it or not, from low to high doesn't really change that much. It does increase slightly, but focusing on that entirely misses the point, which is that the increase in subglottic air pressure does increase quite a lot as we ascend the scale. And that, if we monitor that and address that, then we'll get better vocal function. So I don't use the word support because it gets used so much that it doesn't really mean anything any longer. And there are very few fruitful descriptions, shall we say, that I've heard. And I wouldn't want to confuse apagio breath management, which is the breathing system that I work with and teach. I wouldn't want to confuse that with the generic support that is generally talked about on the interwebs. So engage, that's what I mean when I'm talking about engaging. I'm talking about the core body muscles working in coordination with the vocal fold to produce subglottic air pressure such that you can sing effectively throughout the various registers of your voice. And if that wasn't a mouthful, I don't know what was. Okay, thank you for the continued support of all of our music educations over the years, Jeff. You're welcome. I have a question about training to sing for different styles. I mean that I want to be able to sing a few genres like opera, pop, metal, soul, etc. Any tips on planning my practices around that goal? I like it. I think that's cool. I want to look at this a little bit from the 90 degrees off center. Think about rhythm a lot. The way that you interpret rhythm will have a dramatic effect on how convincing you are in the various styles. Rhythm is so key, and the interpretation of the eighth note pulse is critical, is a critical difference amongst these different styles. Plan for transition periods. Wynton Marsalis, very famous trumpet player, used to talk about it taking him 6 months to transition between jazz and classical repertoire. He is one of the very few individuals who really effectively transitions, where you don't, in like the purists in either camp, I'm sure would say that you can still hear the influence of one on the other, but he really, really transitions. But he claims that it used to anyways, I don't know if it still does, but would take him 6 months to go between styles. So plan on transition periods between them. And finally, amongst all those vocal stylings, bel canto technique in the singing voice will kind of be the biggest umbrella that they can all fit under, but know that you will make compromises when you are not doing that. So much of my teaching is based in bel canto singing technique. But in order to remain in the popular genres, which is mostly what I sing and teach, we make accommodations for vowel sounds, vowel modifications, and things like that. To simplify the concept, we don't go quite as far into the modified vowels as we could, because there's a bit more of an onus of intelligibility that we have to answer to. So plan for transition periods, work on your bel canto, listen intimately to rhythms and the interpretation of the eighth note pulse, and I think that sounds like a lot of fun. Have a good time. Right. I hate the E vowel. Any tips on getting good support despite the closed vowel sound? It's an interesting question. Those to me seem to be two distinctly different situations. If you have good engagement, also talked about in terms of support, so if you have good engagement, good airflow, then the vowel shouldn't matter. So it's more about your vowel alignment on E, but if you don't have good engagement on E, it's quite likely that what you think might be good engagement elsewhere isn't really good engagement. It's just a favorable vowel sound or something to that effect. It's really hard to understand which one's which. But what I can say about the E vowel, or at least offer in terms of thoughts, is that one, everyone seems to have their vowel For me, it's ooh. I don't particularly like ooh. You'll see an absence of it in my songs. I have to very deliberately work it into the vocalizations because I will actively avoid it if I don't. Ooh is my sort of bête noire, if you will. E is narrow vowel. Sandwich it between A and ah. So like, you know, make a vocalization up where instead of maybe do put the E in the middle and notice or try to keep it aligned with the two vowels on the outside. Now, if ah isn't working for you yet, do like A, E, A, and work towards getting E to align with the more favorable vowel, and then start your phrases with it. That's a way of testing yourself. Go from there. Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for your kindness in making your videos available for us. You're very welcome. My question is simple. Would you be so kind to make a more in-depth video or two on vibrato exercises, please? This is tricky. There's only a couple of videos on my channel about vibrato because vibrato, for the most part, emerges when you have good vocal alignment, good phonation. So in as much as you're asking for specific vibrato videos, everything on the channel is really about vibrato. When you have really adequate engagement, when your subglottic air pressure is appropriate to the tessitura that you're singing in. So if you're singing here, and you are, I hate the word support, but you know, that's how we think about these things. But if your engagement, your subglottic air pressure, your support is appropriate to the vowel and the phrase and the range that you are in, then you get the vocal fold and that column of air working in parity, and they tend to oscillate against one another. It's kind of like dipping your toe in the lake, you know? And you're like, ooh, is it cold, is it hot? Is it cold, is it hot? Is it cold, is it hot? You know, and you can't quite tell. And so you dip, 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 dip. Except that we like this status where they reflect back and forth and enter this oscillation, and vibrato emerges. Now, there are exercises where you do a facsimile of vibrato. And I have avoided putting those on the channel because without working with you directly, my concern is that it would be misunderstood or used too much, and what it would end up being was not a path to actual release of the vocal mechanism such that your actual vibrato came through, but that the facsimile was perpetuated and got embedded in your technique, and then ultimately would cause problems later. So the best practice, if you really want a vibrato, if that's really what you're after, then stick to the most comfortable, easy part of your range to sing in and focus on your engagement and vowel formation, such as is presented in the videos. And your vibrato, when the vowel alignment and the release of the vocal mechanism and the subglottic air pressure are all working together, will emerge out of it. You'll feel it first as a sort of instability in the tone or a wiggle, and then you can kind of encourage that wiggle a little bit and you get a more full vibrato. That's my advice to you. I'll think about your request for additional videos on vibrato, but as I say, that misses the point of how vibrato actually develops, and as such, I'm a little bit hesitant to do that. But thank you for your request and thank you for your question. How was your education? Very interesting question. I have been extremely blessed throughout my entire life to have a laundry list of remarkable teachers, instructors. Some I sought out specifically to study with, others that just happened to be along the path. Many were unexpected, which makes my fortune all the greater in that they just inserted themselves into my path. Looking back across the number of educators that I have been so fortunate with which to work, it's not a surprise to me that I take teaching so seriously and do it the way that I do, and especially do it here. This channel is a small way for me to give back. It's such a small, I hesitate to use those words because it's such a small thing, I think, in comparison to what I've been given. But it's something, and it does kind of help me to make available some of the expertise and some of the remarkable instruction, the instrumentalists and vocalists, and I'm thinking of an English teacher right now and a mathematics teacher who is remarkable. But these people, like, you know, they were really teaching me about life and living, and for me, music. It just kind of came in the form of mathematics, and it came in the form of English studies, and it came in the form of, you know, French classes and things like that. And of course, too, the musicians that I was so fortunate with which to study over my years were remarkable, remarkable individuals that taught me more than I have time to delineate in this video. But I'm not sure if what you really meant to ask was what was my education. And I have a master's degree from the University of Michigan in music performance. That's the highest degree that I obtained while I was there. I contemplated staying on for a DMA, which is a Doctor of Musical Arts, but chose not to. I did not apply, so maybe I wouldn't have been able to, but I think it's pointless to speculate. But yeah, I have a master's degree in music performance. So there you go. My bachelor's is in music performance as well. Why can't I pass the note C4? Hard to say without hearing you, quite frankly. My first thought is that is quite likely the primo passaggio, or if you're a basso profondo, it's the secondo passaggio. Primo passaggio, normally we sing past without much thought. Tenors will do that regularly without really realizing that there's a transition there. If you were, in basso profundos are incredibly rare, but if that were the case and that was your secondo passaggio, that would be a reason why. What I would suggest you do is play a D major arpeggio, a 1-octave arpeggio, and start from the top with an oo sound with a Y to start. You, and let your voice be kind of hollow sounding and see what happens. If you can phonate there and you get this kind of you kind of goofy sound, then that's probably, that might be, it's really hard to say. You know, it also depends on your vowels and your airflow and all these other things, like all these different aspects go into it. But start there and see what happens. And maybe try going to E flat on a 1-octave descending arpeggio. Maybe come down to D flat. Go back to C. See what happens. See what the response is like. Those can give you some insights into what your voice is doing and how you can work with it to make it so that you can sing beyond that point without issue. It's really just a start there. Hi, beloved Jeff Rolka. Hello. I have a possibly unanswerable question, but I am hoping there is an answer. This is a really cool question too. I was taking vocal lessons. It was supposed to be every other week, but they often reschedule, so the average is about 1 every month. Okay, first of all, if you're paying someone for voice lessons and they're rescheduling you that much, I always advocate for people sticking with their instructors, you know, in general. Like, there are always going to be circumstances where you're going to want to move on, and that's understood too. But in general, like, I'm much more of an advocate of talking through things, trying to work things out, trying to get it so that the lessons are what they are. But if they're rescheduling you that much, I question, like, the level of commitment to you as a student is in that particular studio, and you might be better served elsewhere. But if you had that arrangement where, like, we're going to have one lesson a month, or it's going to be on an as scheduled basis, or I can do this, and you agree to those circumstances, that's another thing. But if it was supposed to be every week and it turned into this, that's a different matter. It has been about a year. They have said that I should learn jazz and that I'm a jazz singer. I prefer to be a soul rock singer, but they say that they learned by modeling their style after Sarah Vaughan, and since I am also an alto, I should too. That I am to learn 3 of her songs. I spend the majority of my time in between building practice routines online, but my kind of feels like I am doing more independently in terms of base skills. She focuses more on the why I should learn jazz and how. A little unclear on what you were trying to say in that paragraph, I have to admit. So my questions. Is jazz the entry point to transition to soul rock? Meaning, should one take lessons from the start on a certain style, or is jazz the vocal? I think you mean breed, but it says bread here. Oh, no, you do mean bread. I apologize. My mistake. That's a great metaphor. Is jazz the vocal bread that any vocal sandwich can be made with? 2, how does one know if one is getting what they ought to in vocal lessons? How do you find the right teacher? They are my first vocal coach. Decades ago, I took choir, but that's it, so never one-on-one. And being relatively new, I don't know if I am being impatient or if this isn't the right match. I don't know what a good, syllabus, structure vocal lessons should roughly follow. Someone who I vented to about this said maybe I don't know if I can say that. It's not it's not like a big, curse word, but in general, I don't use explicatives. And this is like an explicatives light. It's like not really like what you'd think of as an explicative, but I consider that to be language for a different venue, shall we say. So I'm going to skip that over. I should have just beeped it out, but whatever. So much that the vocal instructor isn't interested in teaching me. So I suppose the third question is, how do I know when I should just not take lessons, even though I feel I need to learn? Sorry for the long multiple part questions. Perhaps something is redeemable in that rambling. My thanks for all you do. Okay, so first of all, you sell yourself short. Those are cool questions, and those are really great questions, because we have all been, maybe not in those specific situations, but we've all been beginners at some point. So it's likely that other people will benefit from the bravery that you've shown by, writing in this question, and I appreciate it. So you're selling yourself a little short there. This is not rambling. This is cool stuff here. And I love the question about the jazz as a sort of transitionary thing into other genres of music. Overview. Can't say as to what, who knows what the vocal teacher is thinking. It doesn't really matter. They're just not there. And if they're not there and you want more personal attention, and it was promised, but it's not being delivered, you might broach the subject first and say, hey, we reschedule or cancel a lot. Can we not do this every week? I want to pay you every week to do this. And if they say, sure, but still don't do it, well, they're kind of showing you who they are, and we can't make assumptions about what they think about your singing or about you as a musician. None of that stuff, I don't think, has any basis here. But if they're just not there, if they have other things, then that's fine. Maybe it's time to look for another instructor. And I would suggest you maybe check into nats.org. They have a teacher finder, which you can use for your specific area, and hopefully they'll help you out. Jazz is a fantastic art form, and there are many, many things that have come out of jazz and have gone into jazz. Do you need to study jazz to then go into soul and rock? No, but it might not be a bad idea either, or at least to do a little bit of that study. the melodic and harmonic complexities of jazz have the aspects of that have their place in contemporary music, in contemporary soul and funk and rock, but in its undiluted format, not so much. So the kinds of changes and melodic innovation that you typically hear in jazz, you wouldn't normally expect to hear in like a soul or an R&B or a funk tune, but there are colorations of it that are absolutely there. But you should really sing what you want to sing, and if that path leads you to the study of jazz and blues in an effort to enhance your understanding of the genre and expound upon what it is that you wish to make in your music, then so be it. Go and do that, and you'll have a reason to do it, and you will attack it with that much more veracity. But if you feel like you've got to do it just to get to what you want to do, I'm not so sure that that's the best pathway forward. I would suggest you do the music that you want, set aside a bit of time for the study of that kind of music, for improvement, understanding, theory, melody, harmony, all that kind of stuff. And then as your aptitude continues to expand, you may find yourself studying more and more of it so that you can make more of your artistry, or you might not. But the thing is that you might spend ages and ages and ages studying jazz and miss out on the blues and getting the aptitude happening there. And as such, become disenfranchised or disenchanted with the notion of singing because you're studying something that you don't really want to study. Better to study what you want to study and then go to the reference material as necessary to generate new understanding, new options, new ideas. That would be my suggestion. As for what lesson schedules are like, it really does come down to what you and your teacher agree to. With my clients, I'm very, very forthright about what I can do or cannot do at any given time. If I have space in my schedule for a new client that can meet on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, I tell them so. If I do not, then I have other options, such as being on a wait list for such a thing, or I can make a referral to another teacher with whom I know and trust, or they can pick up a lesson on an on-call basis if their schedule permits. In other words, I get a cancellation and I can notify them, and if they want the lesson, they'll take it. And if they don't, that's fine. No harm, no foul. The point of it all is to communicate clearly so that everyone understands what is happening and no one is left wondering why they're not getting lessons when they thought they were supposed to be getting lessons. That, to me, would be the worst thing. I would never want my clients to be in the position of feeling like, gosh, I'm supposed to be having lessons and I never get a lesson. Or I was going to have a lesson every week and he's always rescheduling or canceling. That's not the kind of environment that I want in my studio. And so I do things differently. But there's all sorts of different vocal instructors out there, as just as there are vocalists. And we all learn differently and have different requirements. If this particular teacher isn't meeting your requirements, talk to them. See if it can be worked out. If you don't feel comfortable talking to them, that kind of might tell you something too. If you decide to talk, then great. If not, then maybe moving on is a good move too. But my advice would be to start asking some questions first in a kind-hearted way. Just, hey, can we work this out? Right. I have been warming up with your videos for about 30 to 40 minutes in a daily basis, but what else should I do post-warm-up? I have no idea how to approach singing a basic song to begin with, and therefore improving my singing. That's a really great question, and this is one of those topics that I always mean to do more with on the channel. And the more part comes in the form of vocalizations in the guise of lyrical phrases. So the 30 to 40 minutes of vocal warm-ups is awesome. That's really, really good technical practice. You might stick to 20 to 30 so long as you've got a song practice. And my recommendation would be to look at the songs as potential vocalizations. So if you had, for example, Mary had a little lamb, right? You've got that. That's your song. I know, right? This is what happens when I think off the cuff. That's your song. Well, that's a vocalization in the guise of a song, right? What have I done? I've taken the consonants out. This reveals how I am aligning my vowels. Let's say I sang it like this. That's a little too dramatic. Let's just do one. Let's do it like this. You can hear there my ah and my ah derivatives are like just abducting the vocal fold, and it's not in alignment. I need to practice those vowels. Go back to the warm-up videos on my channel, which really are vocalization. Those are vocal technical exercises. They're not just warm-ups. Go back to the ones that feature ah. They're labeled. They're there. There's a few of them that are labeled, but they're in there. Go back to those. Work on your ah vowel. Come back to your song. Evaluate the alignment of the vowels. If it's better, work the consonants back in. That's how we work on songs. Now, the first couple times you do that, it will be laborious to say the least. Generally speaking, that's the way that ends up. The more you do it, the easier it gets, the more effective you will be with it. And it is a great exercise, and it works really, really well. That's what I would suggest you do. I hope all of the answers are helpful. I hope that I've answered your questions well. Feel free to leave your comments. Thanks for watching. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. Hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.